Well, I was about to harvest greens and carrots for tonight's dinner, and I thought I'd invite you to join me. Let's get started with our harvest. It's mid-December and all of our crops are doing very well. Today's a nice sunny day, and as you can see, it's very toasty here in the hoop house at the moment. So far, our coldest temperature outside this December was 15 degrees Fahrenheit, but under double cover in the hoop house, our lowest temperature was 22 degrees Fahrenheit, and our plants have no trouble handling 22 degrees. In fact, they can handle temperatures quite a bit colder than that. Now let's look at the high temperatures for the month. Our high so far outside was 45 degrees, but under double cover, it's 85 degrees. And that's a little bit too hot. I should have vented a little more. But that difference allows these plants to continue growing through the fall and through the winter. Now let's get started with our harvest. Let's start with this beautiful purple Mizuna. Mizuna is a mild Asian mustard green which adds some nice spice to our salads. It's not as cold hardy as some of the other greens, and I actually stopped growing it in the winter garden a few years ago because it usually didn't survive the winter. But my wife insisted that we grow it again this year. We only harvest greens on days where it's above freezing under double cover and our plants have thawed out. Harvesting plants when they're frozen can damage them. As I mentioned, Mizuna doesn't always make it through the winter here, but this is actually the first time I've ever grown it in our hoop house, which is relatively new. So I'm hopeful that it will do better this winter than it has in the past. Okay, now let's harvest some lettuce. I'll leave this red leaf lettuce alone because it's not as well developed as this green lettuce, which I think is Arctic King. We've had very good luck growing this lettuce through the winter here in Zone 5. And all I'll do is I'll harvest some of the outer leaves and I'll leave the plants to continue to grow. They won't actually grow much in December and January, but they will pick up growth again in February. As you can see, the kale back here in the back, near this reflective insulation, is actually drooping a bit. That's because it's actually a bit hot back here. So even in the winter, it can get quite warm here in the hoop house. Okay, now let's move on to the other side of this cold frame to harvest a crop that I featured in my video last week, Siber Frill Kale. Siber Frill is an open pollinated organic heirloom, and it's more tender and not as bitter as other kale varieties. We grew it for the first time last year and really loved it. It's also very cold hardy, which is great, and it has no trouble surviving our winters under double cover. Sometimes kale can be quite tough, but this kale is nice and tender. It's great raw in salads, which is how we'll be enjoying it today. Okay, I don't want to take too much. That should do it. Okay, I'm done harvesting from the cold frames. Now let's harvest from our low tunnels. I'll start with Swiss chard, Tatsoi, and lettuce. This is Fordhook giant Swiss chard, which has probably been here since the summer. Not sure exactly when I planted it. But oftentimes we'll plant Swiss chard in the spring, and if it's in an area that gets covered in the fall and winter, it just keeps growing until the next year, the next spring when it goes to seed. It's very cold hardy. It almost always survives the winter. Okay, that's enough of that. Now let's move on to harvest Tatsoi, which, like Mizuna, which I showed you earlier, is a mild Asian mustard green. Also like Mizuna, it's not quite as cold hardy as some of our other crops. It's never survived the winter for us. It probably survives usually well into December, January. But this is the first year we've grown it in the hoop house, so our hopes are high that it will do better. But just to be on the safe side, we'll harvest quite a bit of it in December. Very tasty, raw, and a mixed green salad. You see some bug damage on these plants, but that probably happened back early in the fall before it got really cold. I think most of the pests are dead now. Alright, that should be enough tatsoi for our salad. And before leaving the hoop house to harvest from our hinged low tunnels, I'll pick some more lettuce. And again, I'm just harvesting the outer leaves. These plants will continue to grow and really pick up growth in February, late winter, early spring. And at that point, they'll be growing so fast that we'll actually have to harvest some of these plants entirely because they're very closely spaced, which is fine now when they're growing slow, but they'll get really crowded in late winter and early spring. Our favorite varieties of lettuce for the winter garden are Hungarian Pink Winter, Arctic King, and Winter Density, though we do have some other varieties out here as well. As a rule, those favorites that I just mentioned are the most cold hardy and the most likely to survive through winter. And one last thing to harvest here in the hoop house. Parsley, one of the more hardy herbs, delicious at this time of year. We'll be adding that to our mixed green salad. Okay, we've got a pretty good start on our harvest for today's mixed green salad. Now let's head out to harvest from our hinged low tunnels, where we're growing mostly kale right now. And the reason we're growing kale there is because those structures don't get as much sun as the hoop house. Kale is very cold hardy and will survive even though they're not getting much sun. Let's go. Hey Oscar, I don't think they can see you, buddy. Okay, this should be enough greens for today's salad. Now let's go to the front yard garden to harvest carrots. We're growing them there under one layer of cover. Carrots are very cold hardy and they're one of the easiest crops for beginners to overwinter. The key though is to start them early enough that they reach maturity before freezing temperatures are common and before your daylight hours drop below 10. For example, these carrots were planted in a sunny spot in August, and we'll be harvesting them all winter long. Okay, I've harvested everything I need for today's salad, and I'll be back in a moment to show you that salad and share the recipe. I'll also show you a special dessert I'm making from a crop that we harvested back in October, right before the first frost, and I'll share that recipe as well. Okay, I'm back with our salad and dessert. Of course, our salad has our mixed greens from the garden. It also has cucumbers, onions, and tomatoes from the store. And those two little things on top that look like crackers are actually baked Parmesan cheese. I just spread a thin layer of Parmesan cheese on parchment paper on a baking dish and baked it for about 7 to 8 minutes at 375 degrees. After baking, the Parmesan chips are crispy, cheesy, and salty, and they make a great addition to the salad. And for the dressing, I just used balsamic vinegar, a little salt, and olive oil. And for dessert, I made a sweet potato pie, which is very similar to pumpkin pie. And the reason the pie is purple is that I made it from purple sweet potatoes that I harvested from our front yard garden in October. And this pie is really delicious. I've included links to both recipes in the description below. So I'm going to head inside to enjoy my dinner. And by the way, if you enjoyed the music featured on today's video, please subscribe to my new YouTube music channel. You'll see a link to that channel in just a minute.